Today, getting the most from your virtual conference experience. Welcome to SolarWorks for Illinois. I'm your host, Tim Montague, and today is a special day because a dear friend and colleague in the podcasting world is coming on the show. He's a solar sales and marketing executive with over 14 years of experience developing projects and territories for internationally recognized companies. Nico's popular podcast, Suncast, is essential listening for anyone interested in better understanding how to grow as a leader and producer in the solar industry. Welcome to SolarWorks for Illinois, Nico.
Tim's long time in coming, man. Really excited to be here. And I just wanted to say from the outset, thanks for inviting me to be a guest on your show. Been watching as you've grown, and it's really inspiring whenever I get to see someone else in the industry like you, Tim, who's a practitioner and who develops solar projects and who engages with solar clients, who brings on thought leaders that I admire, like Christian Rosalind, and locals in the Illinois market like Anthony Starr. I think that the work that you're doing is emblematic of the kind of personal branding and content creation that is sorely needed in the solar industry. So thanks for inviting me to be an additional voice in this conversation.
Well, thank you for making time. It is a real treat to have you in our midst, and looking forward also to seeing you at the Midwest Solar Expo, which was one of the catalysts for me to reach out to you. The Midwest Solar Expo is happening June 15 to 17. It is a 3D virtual conference this year, formerly a face-to-face event like so many conferences that we all attend. But in the age of COVID, conferences are going virtual, and you yourself have started a virtual conference, which we're going to talk about as well. But give our listeners a little more background on what you're up to and why are you so passionate for the clean energy transition?
Absolutely. I also am really excited about the upcoming Midwest Solar Expo. Jake and the team there, Sharona, they're doing a remarkable job of redefining what it means to have a conference experience in a post-pandemic world. I've been in the solar industry, as you mentioned, for 14 years, actually coming up on 14th year anniversary. Just yesterday was my wife and I's 14th anniversary. When I graduated in 2006 from grad school, I started a solar company, got married in the same month, and June of 2006. And at the time, the solar industry was very, very small. It was very much a niche category. We were less than 1% of 1% of overall global power generation. And we've made great strides since then. To put it in perspective, when I started a solar company in Monterey, California, Sunrun was not existent, or it had maybe just begun. I remember actually meeting the founders of Sunrun. In particular, I met with Ed when at the first West Coast Green, 2006, in San Jose, California. I remember going to Solar Power International in 2006, and it all fit in, one very, very small conference room compared to how the North America Smart Energy Week runs now. And I was bit by the bug that I wanted to be in an industry that was growing, that had the chance to grow for my entire career. Prior to that, I'd been in the music industry. So being on stage by far is not something that is foreign and unknown to me. And I'd been a Peace Corps volunteer in Guatemala and got really interested in what, at the time, the founder of Grameen Bank had written in a book about the 1 billion+ people in the world who didn't have access to electricity. And as a Peace Corps volunteer, that was something that really resonated with me. I came back to finish my graduate degree in business, and I realized that there was an opportunity to serve those folks, and I needed to get more experience in understanding how clean generating technologies could leapfrog the existing power infrastructure. So I started a solar company, and then as fate would have it, 2008, the global financial crisis, I ended up twilighting that business and moving to work for a larger company. And so went my career, as the story of many others, where I went from position to position, growing, increasing levels of responsibility in the industry. Spent some time at Trina Solar and then at Conergy, developing both the markets for Latin America as well as large, 100+ megawatt scale solar power plants in Latin America. And the thing that I realized over that 10+ year tenure actually selling and developing solar plants was that we weren't even close to the tipping point in the major markets like United States and Europe for getting to what we call grid parity, when renewable energy can generate at the same or cheaper price than fossil fuels. But we were seeing it in Panama and in Mexico and in Chile and now in Brazil, markets that went from 0 penetration to gigawatts of penetration over the last 5 years. And so 2012, 13, I started working in Latin America to help in that market where it was very clear that the avoided cost, or what it would otherwise cost to generate power, was sufficient in the teens, low 20s in some cases, to allow us to get to grid parity with solar power, because we still hadn't gotten to solar at what we're seeing now, 2, 3, 5 cents a kilowatt hour. And I began to really get curious about what I didn't know about how to develop a solar market, and had been listening to these things called podcasts. And that led me over a period of a couple of years to really start inviting friends, as I've seen you do now with SolarWorks Illinois. Start inviting friends in the industry to help me understand their particular domain expertise. In this case, it was, what do I need to know if I'm going to go on a business trip to Panama? And how do I think about single axis trackers as compared to fixed tilt solar in Chile or Colombia? And those friends graciously gave me their time, as I'm doing now with you on your podcast, so that I could record these interviews. And it started a podcast back in 2015 that now has almost 270, I think now, different episodes with clean energy industry leaders and subject matter experts to help folks like you and I and our friends better understand the path that we're on, the obstacles we're overcoming. And it's been a real joy the last 4.5 years, taking 10 years of solar experience and turning it into an online education platform to help others understand not only how to develop themselves an entrepreneurial or intrapreneurial way for clean energy businesses, but also how to develop and grow a professional, their professional track, find more professional growth, and find their place in the industry that we know and love, clean energy.
The day is coming when solar, wind, and storage are going to eclipse all other energy industries. We already see the carbon bubble bursting as we speak. The oil industry is in free fall. And just like other sources of energy fell by the wayside, it wasn't for lack of supply of whales, for example, right, that took us away from whale oil as a source of energy. The sun gives us in 1 hour all of the energy we could use for an entire year, which means that not only is PV and wind going to largely power society, that we are just swimming in energy. And we're going to convert solar to green hydrogen, for example, and drive all kinds of our infrastructure, including thermal applications for heating and cooling. So it is truly an exciting time. And I tell my 2 sons who are in their early manhood, no matter what your interests are, work in the renewable energy industry, because you have a glide path for 50 years of pure growth. So it's just such a wonderful time. And I'm pinching myself pretty much on a daily basis, because it wasn't until 2016 when I got a call from a Canadian who said to me, Tim, we've reached grid parity, as you were talking about, with solar and wind. And I was asleep at the wheel. I grew up doing solar thermal, and I am passionate for sustainability, and that has been the thread that connected all of my various careers through the years. But now I'm on that train, and it is rolling, and it is a really exciting time. So with that comes a certain Wild West. It is, while the technology of solar panels is now relatively mature, it's been in the market for 70 years. The industry is still nascent and going through lots of changes. And part of that is the conference experience. So let's shine a light on the conference experience. And maybe you can start with the summit that you organized this past April.
Yeah, absolutely. So you probably have the same experience that I do in the solar industry. We very much have a legacy mindset, um, as a good friend of mine put it on a recent interview, Mike Casey. Which is a fascinating look at how do we, the energy industry, which encompasses oil and gas, clean energy, um, energy efficiency, how do we think about reaching consumers? How do we think about reaching business partners, and especially B2B? And by and large, in the clean energy business, and we'll look at solar as an example, business to business is done face to face. It is countless hours on planes and sitting in boardrooms selling directly to your customer. There's a sense that because our client is spending so much money, that we need to be deferent to their time and respect and be in person with them. Also, because we're dealing with a technology that is, in many cases, it's a manual technology. You got to touch it and feel it and actually see it installed. And in many cases, see it installed before you believe that it's real. Countless consumers would attest to that being their experience. They see the solar on their roof and they see their meter spinning backwards, which was a common visual that we gave clients when we sold back in the late 2000s and early 2010s. Um, that that experience of being a physical asset that you add an infrastructure to a building or a farm led to our industry building gigantic trade shows where you can go and physically touch and see and feel not only the product, but get to know the vendors, your counterparts at other companies, the conference experience as an add-on to the expo, the trade hall, allows us to add education. But over the last 10 years, we've seen an explosion in online education. It is a $1 trillion industry. We've got companies like Solar Energy International have been around for 25 years, have taken the bulk of their training online. You've got many other examples in the public domain, like Harvard and many of the Ivy League schools, Stanford, Harvard, as well as Udemy as an example. Platforms where online learning has become the norm. Yet, as an industry, we still default back to meeting in public, spending millions of dollars flying everyone into Anaheim or Salt Lake City, and convening. When the pandemic hit, I was about to travel to DC to spend time with the Solar Power International team, talk more about this upcoming North America Smart Energy Week. And then from there, going to Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh to speak at the Carnegie Mellon Energy Week, which is the largest university-held energy conference on a campus in the United States. Over 1,000 people attend every year. We were doing a venue within, sort of like a conference within a conference about solar. We had partnered with them to help run that. With Suncast Media. And I started getting phone calls. This event and that event and another event were all being canceled. And that's when it dawned on me. I still was building my now digital business, Suncast Media, in a very face-to-face format. And I realized how much not only personal income was evaporating before my very eyes, but all my friends had their businesses crumbling before their eyes, who relied very much on these face-to-face conferences for networking, for justifying going to another city to prospect and meet with potential clients. And I realized not only do we need an opportunity to have early, quick action and leadership, but nobody had really yet figured out how to transition our events to an online experience. I reached out to my team, reached out to a few friends that I trusted and said, hey, if I do this, will you come alongside and help support it so that we can make it free to the audience? We can use it as an experiment in a lab to see what it looks like to actually put an event together. And would you be willing to speak or sponsor? And in a span of 3 weeks, we went from virtually no virtual experience for Suncast Media other than the podcast, which people were used to and following. We had 0 YouTube channel. We had done 2 webinars in the past, but I've done countless hours of speaking in public and moderating conference panels, the same as you. And I realized, okay, now it's time for leadership. We're going to stand this up. And over the course of 3 weeks, we actually put together a 3-day conference experience. We changed the format because we didn't want it to feel like a conference. The reason that conferences are 3 days sequential, there's nothing wrong with that, is to be efficient with your travel dollars. We can't do a conference in Washington, D.C. every Wednesday because folks aren't going to be able to travel back and forth. So we hold it 3 sequential days so that everyone can come in, save on hotel costs, etc. We decided to host 3 weeks consecutive on Wednesday, starting April 22nd on Earth Day. And we had a conversation around how are we building community as an industry? How do we address what's happening with the pandemic related to finance for solar, selling solar online, training and education, and we built 3 days around community building, around direct impact of the innovation that we're having on the broader industry of energy, and then the third was specifically focused on Latin America, where I have a particular domain expertise and have spent a lot of time. And I was amazed at how, in such a short amount of time, we were able to identify the right platform, educate our community that it was going to happen, build a networking environment through a free Facebook group, and have 1,500 people register to attend this event in multiple languages, right? It was a bilingual event. And it just goes to show that the underlying belief that this is something that can and should happen was already nascent. It was already there. We just tapped into it. And we did it early and quickly because I knew people like Jake Rosemarin and Sharona from Midwest Solar Expo and the folks from solar energy trade shows that run the SPI events were still thinking about it. And they were going to take some time to work through sort of the machine that is these larger conferences to figure out how to do them. So we did something early and fast to almost as a proof of concept. As such, we've had folks who partnered with us, like Jake and the Antenna Group and National Renewable Energy Lab, NREL, reach out and say, what did you learn? How are you doing this? And we've begun to work with teams like Jake and the Midwest Solar Expo to think about this experience. How does networking happen? The virtual conference experience I propose is something that's here to stay. I don't think it's going to completely replace the in-person because, let's face it, we're social creatures and I want to go and have a beer with you in Minneapolis as much as the next guy. But it's opened our mindset to think about how do we actually do this right? And how do we actually live the sustainability that's the core element and philosophy of solar energy transitioning away from fossil fuels? If every time we want to make a transaction, we have to get on a plane and fly to a place. So it's been a really interesting experience to see how we develop community, how do we develop content and deliver it virtually in a way that doesn't feel like yet another webinar.
Indeed. I'm glad you mentioned education. The whole MOOC phenomenon, right, burst onto the scene maybe 10 years ago, and that has transformed education. That transformation, of course, is still happening. The University of Illinois, where I live here in Champaign-Urbana, is going to a hybrid approach this fall. They are going to have the students on campus, but they're trying to thin down the crowds, right, keep class sizes down. And so they're going to do a lot more with virtual education, the so-called hybrid approach. So I do think that, well, the virtual conference in the age of COVID is absolutely necessary, right? We have to figure this out. But there's benefits too. It's safer, it's healthier, it's much more affordable for everyone involved. And so now I can consider going to 5 conferences, whereas before I only went to 2 or 3, which is very exciting to me. And I also believe that the face-to-face is critical, so people are just going to be more selective about where they spend their face-to-face time. And of course, that's a challenge for organizers of events like SPI, which are so massive with 20,000 plus attendees. How do you do that safely? So, but tell us pre, during, and post, how did from your perspective, how did the Suncast Summit go this spring?
It was such a learning experience. Prior to the event, we had we were growing our email list. We had regular conversation in social media with our audience, our community constituents, as it were. So we began to promote regularly in our social feeds, namely LinkedIn, to generate interest, and had folks signing up even before we had a landing page. So I think that not everyone's going to have, certainly people who already have conferences will have a similar experience, because let's face it, email is still the #1 way to sell and reach out to your community. So email engagement is huge. We learned a lot about the sequencing of emails, but also the communication requirement to help folks understand how to get into the platform we were using. And I think that folks who are watching that are curious about the Midwest Solar Expo, as an example, with this digital experience that Jake and the team have come up with, that in fact is almost like immersive virtual reality with avatars and the like, it does require an incredible amount of education. The thing that folks seem to expect is that they're going to have 1,500 people sign up and 1,500 people attend live. The reality of the internet, and something that we experienced, is, look, there's a much smaller percentage of people who show up live, because we've all been trained through countless webinars and through YouTube that it's a on-demand experience. So what I learned about how we craft the message, and how we'll do this again next year when we do the follow-on Suncast Summit, is really around how to present the information, even how to intro the conversation and manage the conversation with someone who very well may be watching it a month or two later from the comfort of their home in their pajamas. How do you navigate that conversation in a way that doesn't try to pretend that the audience is there in their suit and tie in a physical audience watching you? And then getting accustomed to the fact that if 400 people register, you may have 90 people watching live. And that does not mean that you're going to only ever have 90 people watch it. The beauty of this sales process and this educational format is that someone can watch this information a year from now and still learn from it, which is the second lesson that I learned. Is as you're creating topics for these virtual events, a lot of folks want to be timely. And I feel that a webinar is a great place to put a conversation around how do we resonate with the sales process post or during COVID-19. However, we have an opportunity, with Midwest Solar Expo and all the other events coming up, that you can now repurpose that content, and it's going to live. It's got a life of its own. It's recorded. The topic itself should reflect that. It should reflect that this is an educational format and venue where we don't necessarily have to be so timely and talk about something that only is good for tomorrow, because someone who's 6 months from now going to look at it, they're not going to be as interested if the day-to-day or present experience isn't similar to April or May of 2020. And then following that, we had never started a Facebook group. So we started a Facebook group so that folks could funnel into. It's called the Clean Energy Guild. It's pretty easy to find. We've got about 300 people now that are participating there. And I found something really interesting. From 0 to about 100 people in a Facebook group, you're an echo chamber, like I, as the creator, where it's kind of the only person ever posting. From 100 to maybe about 400 people, which is where we're at now, there are a few key contributors that it's important to invite in. I point to Derek Lila from PV Buzz as a great example. He's helping us get that momentum so people feel like they can contribute. And then my understanding from friends who have good Facebook groups, 400 or more, it starts to become more community engaged and involved. Over 1,000 starts to be just whack-a-mole. But it begs the question, how do we keep a conversation going after an event? And what does that networking actually look like? And I'm going to be curious to see how Jake and the team do with Midwest Solar Expo. What's the post-conference experience? They've got this virtual world. My understanding is you can go into that virtual world anytime. You can also rent virtual space in that world. So is this a tipping point? Is this a place where now our networking is going to move to a virtual experience, and we could, you and I, not only through Zoom, meet in a 3D world with our 3D visors and feel like we're having a conversation, drink coffee together, you know, with our digital avatars. I think that there's a lot of platforms like the one they're using, like Remo. We used Crowdcast to broadcast essentially our sequential webinars, which we turned into a summit. We used Hey Summit for registration because there are a lot of platforms like that that let folks register and allow you to present the speakers, etc. So we learned a lot about tools, but I feel like we're still learning, and the next couple of months are going to be integral to figuring out how do folks want to communicate in this virtual space, in this digital world. There's so much that we can optimize, but it was a great learning experience for delivering content and getting people to engage. The other thing is that we saw a huge ramp, just like a normal conference, 2-3 days ahead and the day of, saw a lot more registrations than the couple of weeks prior of promoting. But you've got to be consistent. You have to stay in front of the audience. You have to make sure that they're seeing the conversation, because it's going to take 2, 3, 4 weeks of them being reminded so that they have that subconscious anchor before they will register and they'll take you seriously, which comes back to a point I wanted to make, and I'm proud of what you're doing with SolarWorks for Illinois, Tim, is consistency is key. If you're just going to throw up an event, folks may or may not engage, but they probably more than likely won't take you seriously. If you, like you and I, consistently show up week after week, that's when people start taking you seriously. And that's where really developing a content management system and platform and a calendar becomes crucially important. And that's where I see a lot of solar companies right now lacking. And there could be a lot gained by really focusing on how do you show up in a digital world consistently? What's the message, and how do you tell the folks that will be your customers the problem you solve and how they can engage with you?
Yeah, it is. I have to say it's somewhat gratifying to be where we are today, because now I've been using Zoom for a couple of years, and it's not perfect, but I know the good, the bad, and the ugly, and I know how to get it done in a timely manner. So thank you for that rundown of the summit, and I would encourage people to check out Suncast Media Solar Summit. If you just Google those words, you'll find the summit. And then the Midwest Solar Expo, that is the URL for the Midwest Solar Expo. The Midwest Solar Expo is a 3D immersive experience. Let's talk a little bit about that in the last couple of minutes that we have, Nico. I took a tour and posted a short video about that, an interview with Jake Rosemarin, who is the co-founder of the Midwest Solar Expo. So you can check that out on my YouTube channel. But it is awkward showing up as an avatar. It's not something we do in our normal lives. It reminded me very much of, some of these virtual world games that I've just, gotten a taste of occasionally. And I do think that there's some advantages, though, despite the barriers. For those who are a little technology averse, it's going to be a little uncomfortable at first. But there are some tools there. You can identify who's in the room and then say, go to Nico across the room without even seeing that Nico's there.
Across the campus even.
Right. And so that is going to tremendously augment our ability to connect with people that we want to connect with and build a relationship with companies that we may not have one with.
There's a few things that I saw, and I'm sure you noticed this as well, that really captivate my attention. I was an early Second Life player back in 2008, 2009, right? This company that came into existence out of Oakland, where folks were literally becoming millionaires selling real estate in a virtual world. And I thought this was an unbelievable experience, but it was ahead of its time. I remember walking around a conference a couple of years ago and having an idea, wouldn't it be cool if instead of the things that we hate about conferences, you walk around the trade show and somebody's constantly looking at your badge rather than your face? What if we could have an augmented reality experience with vis-a-vis Google Lens? This tells you how long ago this was. I was thinking about it 3-4 years, where you have the information you want the public to know about you, augmented, like in a virtual or an augmented reality way, presented around you, above your head or what have you. And I went into this virtual experience with Jake, same as you, and I saw that the name of the person can float above their head. I can see that they are, it made me think of Ready Player One. I can see that someone is in this other side of campus, and I can virtually teleport to where they are. Then I can invite them into a private conversation that has a digital wall around it, even though we're sitting at a table in what looks like the woods, or we're sitting on a boat in what looks like a lake. I can lock that environment so that you and I can have a digital discussion privately, and nobody else can listen, or presumably nobody can listen. And that just for me sparked a ton of ideas of how we are going to be selling online in a new and fantastic way, how we're going to be networking and engaging online in new and fantastic ways that we can't even comprehend right now. I invite folks to really give this virtual experience a chance. I'm excited about what the Midwest Solar Expo represents as an opportunity for our industry to think outside of the bounds of one-to-one personal in-person selling. You got companies like Midwest Solar Expo in the conference realm. You've got companies like Clean.tech and others in the physical residential solar sales realm that are leveraging virtual and augmented reality to make the customer experience, us as attendees or clients as the recipients of our information, that much more efficacious without having to be face-to-face. I think it speaks to what we all want to see in our industry, which is that sustainability in all its forms can be ingrained into our business practices. And I think that those who attend Midwest Solar Expo and who get to see the panel that you're going to moderate, or the one I'm going to moderate, or participate in our virtual Suncast interview, or participate in any of the conferences, their minds are going to be opened to a different way of communicating that we're only in the ground floor right now of exploring. And the companies who really lean into this, I propose, are going to be the ones who are able to scale into the next decade of the way that we can augment our sales, education, and networking experiences.
Well said. Well, we're going to have to do a follow-on conversation, Nico, after the expo to break down how that went for us.
Yeah, let's do it.
And I think it's going to be a wonderful learning experience. So really excited for the Midwest Solar Expo.
I'm going to do some screenshots so we can show them on our next, the next time we get on.
Yes.
We'll do some virtual walkthroughs and people can actually see what it is they've experienced.
Indeed. Indeed. So please, dear listeners, give us a thumbs up on YouTube, subscribe to our channel, check us out at cesnrg.com/podcast. I'm Tim Montague, your host. Thank you, Nico Johnson, for coming on the show today. I really appreciate it.